Welcome, everyone. So glad you're here today. We're excited to get started. I'm going to give everyone 1 or 2 minutes to get into the Zoom room. And while they're doing so, I would love for you to take a moment to share with us where in the world you are calling in from today. And if you have kids that inspired you to come to the session, tell us how old your kids are. So where you're coming from and how old your kids are if you have children. We're excited to kick off today. We'll officially start the webinar here in about 2 minutes. If you are just coming into the room, we're just putting into the webinar chat where you're coming from, how many kids you have, if you have any. If you're with an organization, you can share that as well. And I just realized the chat was not on, so let's make it possible now. So if you were trying to enter into the chat, it should now be accessible. And go ahead and type into the chat where you're coming from, where you are. If you're within an organization, share your organization. And if you have children that inspired you to come to this webinar today, feel free to pop that into the chat as well. We're going to try to tailor this webinar lunch and learn session to the ages and stages that we have in the room. So we'll do our best to address the entire spectrum of ages for Gen Z. Wonderful. Thank you for those of you who already put it in the chat. So happy to have you here. I see a few friends and some colleagues we know well, also some new faces, so welcome. Give it 1 more minute as people are coming in. I love seeing the global audience. Welcome and thank you for making the time. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I would like to say thank you so much for taking the time to do a Lunch and Learn executive webinar session with us today. I'm Amy Blankson. I'm the CEO of the Digital Wellness Institute, and I'm thrilled that you're here. If you're new to the Digital Wellness Institute, we as an organization work with other organizations across the globe to help their employees to find balance and work on beating burnout in the digital era. And each month we offer these world-class experts who come in for a Lunch and Learn webinar session to talk about topics that matter most to individuals as they're trying to navigate our always-on, hyper-connected world. And today we are fortunate enough to have a special guest, Bobo Blankson, or more affectionately known as Dr. Bobo by his patients. He's going to speak with us today about tech, health, and happiness in Gen Z with a particular lens on executive parents. Dr. Bobo is an adolescent medicine specialist. He graduated from Harvard and the Yale School of Medicine and went on to train in adolescent medicine at the largest military installation in the Department of Defense in the US. And he's since been featured on numerous publications, including the New York Times, Huffington Post, CNN, Forbes, CBS News, and so many more. He's the author of a middle grade novel called The Saucier's Bones, which is a novel designed to teach teens about cooking as a health literacy tool. And most recently, he served as an expert on Oprah's happiness course. Not only is Dr. Bobo a phenomenal physician with expertise on this topic that you're going to love, he's also an amazing human being as well. And I know this because he's my husband. And I'm so grateful to have him join forces with me today to talk about a topic that's on many of your minds at the start of a school year, mental health for our teenagers. So without further ado, let me cue up this conversation. So I know that we hear at the Digital Wellness Institute, we hear from audiences all the time, this one central question, which is tech good or is it bad for our teens? And as you'll hear from Dr. Bobo today, the answer is not so simple. Today, we'll cover a range of topics that we hear from parents all the time: device management, social media and apps, gaming, and yes, even AI. We will frame this conversation for how we can optimize our parenting styles for the current challenges in the world today. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to do answer as many questions as we can for you. So we're going to do a dialogue back and forth. I'm going to ask you about a couple of key topics that I know are on people's minds, and then we'll turn it over to you to ask your questions as well. So don't be shy, go ahead and share. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So let's get started.
Let's go.
All right. Welcome. So the first topic I think that I wanted to address was just getting devices into teens' hands. We hear a lot of questions about what age is the right age to let a teen get a smartphone. So let's go there first. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, Amy. I'd say that there are recent studies showing that 94% of teens already have cell phones. So if you're a parent who is currently in charge of a teenager and trying to hold out, you are definitely pushing against the current, right?
Yeah.
Most of your child's peers have phones. And I don't really want to make a blanket statement like there's a certain age that you should or shouldn't. I think it's going to vary by family. I think even our family, right? It was very flexible. Our teenager probably didn't get her cell phone until almost her teenage years, and the youngest one probably got hers a little bit earlier, but she also showed a little bit more of that emotional intelligence and sort of the kind of wherewithal to know what to do with a device. And she also wasn't on it all the time. So I don't know that there's an exact age, but I will say that if you're thinking, oh man, my 13-year-old, should I do it? My 14-year-old, should I do it? I'm going to tell you, for your child's social and emotional development, I think a phone is a good idea, actually, because I think it gives you an opportunity to begin this process of education.
Yeah, we're experts, but we're also parents in this space, which means that we're also fallible at times. But
Absolutely.
we've learned a lot because we have 3 children now. We've got a 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And one of the things that I've noticed as a mother is that there's different striations of tech literacy that's emerged because the smartphone came out 2 weeks after our daughter was born. And so she's now 16. So that dates the iPhone for us. It's a really simple metric. But when she came into the world, I remember her first birthday being pretty thrilled that she could unlock my phone by the age of 1. And I thought, oh my gosh, we have a genius. I'm so proud, so excited.
Yeah.
And then like a year later, I was horrified. Oh my gosh, I let my 1-year-old be introduced to the smartphone with no boundaries, and I didn't know what it could do and how addictive it was. And as time has gone on, the world has changed. The age has changed. The school teaching has changed. Any thoughts you want to add?
Well, there's actually a study that just came out today in JAMA Pediatrics that sort of pointed out the dangers of early screen time use, that kids who are using, 1 to 4 hours of screen time as early as age 1, by the time you look at those kids again at age 2 and age 4, you're seeing these delays in communication and fine motor skills and development. But these are things that we didn't know, So as innocent parents, handing phones to our kids and saying, hey, we probably thought, okay, maybe this isn't the best idea, but now the data is starting to roll out like, hey, we really need to be, monitoring this from a very young age. But we're talking about kind of a different age group today, right? Like we're talking about now these kind of middle grade, high school age kids. What do we do? How much screen time is too much?
Absolutely. So you said that it's not easy to have a specific age in mind, but are there hallmarks that your child is either ready or not ready for a smartphone?
Yeah, that's a good question, Amy. I mean, I think in many cases, you sort of know as a parent when your child seems more ready to take on the responsibility. For many of us, we're talking about a $300-400 device. If you're not comfortable handing that to your child, they may not be ready for a cell phone, right? But then there are just logistic issues. When we had 2 children at one school and one at a separate school, in my mind as a parent, I was like, man, it'd be so nice if that 9-year-old had a phone so that when I'm busy trying to do pickups, I can reach her and contact her. And that actually came in handy sometimes. So I think every family is going to operate just a little bit differently, but I think it's more about what you do with that device, right? I mean, I hope that becomes the theme of what we talk about. It's your intention. The intention of what you're doing with the device is really what matters more than the actual device itself.
And if you're in that gray space where you're not quite sure yet, I do know a lot of parents have opted for some of the dumb phones, or as they call them, or dumb watches, which would be devices that don't have all the apps, but have the ability to call a limited set of individuals. So if you're looking for that safety ground and also easing them into the responsibility of owning a device, that might be a good place to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that leads into the next question. I know the American Academy of Pediatrics originally said 1 hour of entertainment related screen time was the rule. It then became 2 hours, and then the pandemic hit. And as we all know, the question was not how much screen time, but try not to be on it all the time. So I think the world has changed a little bit. You and I argue about this all the time, but share with the audience about what your thoughts are as a pediatrician.
So usually in visits with patients, I like go through a list of healthy habits that are very important to me. And amongst those healthy habits is screen time. And I talk about having 2 hours or less of entertainment screen time. And, it's funny saying that in the room with the patient and the parent. And of course, the patient, usually, the 12, 13, 16-year-old, usually says first right off the bat, they go, oh, Dr. B, but I'm on my screens like all the time for school. I mean, I'm doing homework. And I'm like, hey, entertainment screen time. I'm being very specific. And then they're like, oh, right, entertainment screen time, right? They're different things, but I bring that up to just speak about our emerging world. When we were in school, the amount of time that I spent on screens during the school day was almost zero. I mean, we didn't do anything on screens. I mean, after school, I'd go to the computer lab and try to play video games with my friends. But like during the school day, everything, was analog. And I think in these days, we just took our kid for orientation and she got handed a, $1,000 computer and it's like, hey, you're going to have this computer for the school year. And she expects to have to log in and do homework from that. I mean, it's just a different world. So part of the idea of having 2 hours or less of entertainment screen time acknowledges that already a fair amount of our children's day is spent on screens. So for me saying, hey, I get that you're on your screens for school, but what I'm saying is outside of school, let's try to keep it within some reasonable range. And 2 hours, I think, is still a reasonable number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that we argue about is what is entertainment? And I think that the question gets really muddy. We have our youngest daughter who is a YouTube creator, and as a digital wellness expert and daughter of a pediatrician, you would think that that's probably the last thing you would expect to come out of our mouths, but she spends a lot of time creating, not just consuming, but creating. And it's actually learning. She's learning and she's being really creative.
Agreed.
So do I count that as entertainment or do I count that as productivity?
Well, and I think that we may get this more in sort of like later in the conversation, but we have to start to have a real conversation about the sorts of apps and devices that our kids are using, because I think you're right, Amy. I mean, there is kind of a nuance between what is true entertainment screen time and what is, actual learning. I think I'd have kids who play Minecraft, swear and say, hey, I'm learning, I'm building, I'm doing all this, exploration of new worlds. And like, look, I do feel like some video gaming is absolutely learning. And, even the kids playing games like Call of Duty and Rainbow Six. And I know parents are out there probably like cringing when I say that, but I hear about these kids playing together, and I play these games like myself, and they're interacting, they're strategizing, they're really learning through the video game. But I do think it's still entertainment. And I would love to see those same kids, hang out, outside of school and, play sports together or whatever it is, right? So I think we can argue about what entertainment truly is, but I do think that 2 hour mark is still a reasonable, just given the amount of time that they spend on everything else during the day, that, 2 hours is a lot. It's really funny. I think this summer, I'm seeing a lot of kids, especially at the end of the summer, I think they dread sort of like coming into the office for their physicals because they know that Dr. Blankson's healthy habits are going to come up. And when I get to the screen time question and they're like, oh, like they roll their eyes back, they're like, you're going to be so upset. But I'm reasonable and I'm a parent. I go, hey, I know you've spent probably more time on your screens this summer because you haven't had as much work and you haven't been doing your 2 hour a day sport and you haven't had a homework. So of course your screen time is a little bit higher. I think taking all of this with that sort of humility, that kind of grain of salt, that saying, hey, we're human, we spend time, the time that we spend watching shows together. I see that as such valuable family time that, yeah, it's entertainment, but we're being social. We're kind of like we're pausing the show and, like talking about a difficult social issue. I think those are things that should be, celebrated and applauded, as opposed to, yes, I sat in my bed under the covers and I binged all of Gilmore Girls season 2. Okay, that is really.
I've never done.
Oh yeah,
not the whole
right.
season.
So that's my point. It really depends on what your kid is doing and what you're doing with your kid, right?
Yeah. So when you talk about screen time, are you talking about solo consumption of entertainment? Are you talking like if you're watching screen time as a family, you're watching a movie, does that count into their 2 hours?
Yeah, I think it does count as part of their 2 hours, but I think they can be a little bit like more flexible with that time because, and I think we're about to talk about this, when you start to venture into social media and what that is, I think that what this generation of parents is finding is that our kids interact on their phones way differently than we do. Like, I believe that the texting function built into a phone is sufficient to send text messages. My teenagers think that you have to put on a funny face or a filter to send messages. I find that ridiculous. They find that fun. So, hence, when they're on Snapchat, does that really count as their entertainment screen time? Well, I don't think so. I think they're really having fun sending messages. So that's different. But if they're on TikTok or if they're on YouTube Shorts and they're just mindlessly, and I will say that it's mindless because the algorithm is designed to make you do mindless things like just swipe left, right? Or swipe up or whatever, they are kind of just mindlessly wasting time. And look, I think that there is some of that mindless swiping that absolutely is beneficial at times, right? I think that it is wonderful stress relief. How many of us have watched a funny cat video or something and just smiled and giggled and it just lifted our, spirits for a minute? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But as you parents know, I'm sitting in the office, and if you ever get the pleasure of being in an office with me and I ask your kid to take out a cell phone and we look at their screen time together, you'll know that I see some teenagers who are spending, 2 to 3 hours a day on TikTok, a day, and that's in addition to then the time they spend on Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, which I think are the 4 sort of biggest apps that are used. So, it's not just one thing to say, hey, I spent an hour kind of like messaging like my friends, back and forth versus, oh, I spent an hour and a half just swiping through short videos. I think those are 2 very different uses of social media.
One of the things that I've been on the hunt for as a digital wellness expert is a stat that says, where's the point of maximum utility? How much distraction is good? And at what point does it become not useful?
Yeah.
I think, and I haven't found an exact number and certainly not one in a study yet, but I think that number anecdotally is right about an hour of distraction, consumption, swiping. And beyond that, there's a steep drop off in which it's actually not that helpful, where you have a hard time pulling away because you just got into a bottomless pit of scrolling, or you're just doing something just because.
Right.
So I think you brought up the really important point, which is the difference between mindless use tech and mindful use. And I think there's a really important distinction there that as parents, we have a role to play in teaching kids what mindful use of tech could be. What are we doing on our devices? A story about a couple summers ago when I took the kids to the library and we were turning in our summer reading list, and they got to go in the treasure box for turning in their reading list. And I kind of jokingly asked the librarian if I could turn in my list, and the librarian was like, sure. So I started writing down all the books I'd read for that summer. Turns out I had read 33 books. As you know, I'm on my Kindle all the time. I love Kindle. Yeah. It's probably my biggest vice on my device. But the kids looked at me and they laughed and they're like, you are reading? When did you read, Mom? I never saw you with the book. I said, what do you think I'm doing on my phone? I'm reading all the time. And it occurred to me that there was this disconnect between what they thought I was doing on my phone and what I was actually doing. They thought I was playing Roblox or Fortnite. I don't know, whatever is in their mind of what you do on a phone. And I had my own idea of what I was doing, and it never connected. And so since then, I've been really trying to be mindful about telling the kids what I'm doing when I'm on my device. I'm checking this work message, or I'm, communicating with so-and-so, or I'm trying to think about something or learn something. And it brings them in to understand what I'm doing on a screen. And then we together can begin to socially norm what is mindful use of tech and what is mindless. What does that really look like? How does it feel? Do you feel yucky afterwards and just meaningless?
Yeah, I think just to tag along to that, when I talked about, or when you brought up the fact that we watch shows together as a family, as you know, like something that we've tried to work on really diligently is this idea of when we're watching something together, are we really watching something together? And this is going to be a pain point, I think, for all of us, because how many times if we sat down for a family show and 15 minutes into the show, you look around and everybody is also on another device while that show is on. And that is something that I think is so difficult for all of us to do, because I don't know, I feel like these devices have, tried to turn us into ultimate maximizers. Like, well, there's already one screen there, but if I have another screen, what else can I accomplish? And sometimes, like, we're doing emails, I'm doing notes, somebody's crafting. Now the crafting I'm okay with, because like that usually is non-digital crafting. It's like somebody is doing, knitting or drawing, and that's fine to me. But when I look around and we're also on other devices while we're watching a show, I'm like, okay, come on, guys, we got to do better. We got to really be engaged,
Yeah. And sometimes it's calling it out, but I think also recognizing the trend of what's happened, right?
Mhm.
A lot of these behaviors emerged in the pandemic.
Absolutely.
We know screen time rose 30%, and we could see that happening as it was happening. We knew all this time on Zoom was doing stuff to us. But what's changed is that time hasn't gone down since we came out of the pandemic. We're still at elevated screen time, and we're still at an onslaught of more platforms, more messages flying at us, and more demanded out of us. So we feel it as parents, kids feel it too. And so, like you said, we're trying to like maximize, and we haven't had that moment of breaking from, this is time for entertainment just as a family, we're going to do one thing, we're going to talk about it, versus like, let's all just relax together and it'll be a free for all. So that's something that we're working on. And I'm curious to hear other things that you're coming up with as well. I know a couple of you started to put some messages in the chat, and I invite you to share some more thoughts with us. For a presence of mind, we may not answer until the very end, but we see your messages and we will get back to them. I want to turn now, for right now though, from device management into apps and social media. You started to go there, but let's look a little bit at some of the research around social media. We've all heard the studies that say social media is particularly bad for teen girls, or that social media is maybe not great for our mental health, for self-comparison. Share your perspective and what you tell your patients.
Yeah. I think those statements that you made are sort of the worst of social media, right? And I don't think that those statements reflect the true reality, which is, I think that there's a lot that teenagers and our children can learn from social media and gain from social media. Most of the studies are actually showing that it's excessive or overuse, right? Overuse of social media, where you begin to see the increases in depression and social anxiety and those other issues. I think that one of the challenges that we have as doctors, right, is that we have kids who are coming in with these problems, and the problems of depression and anxiety are, of course, multifactorial, Amy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about genetics, you're talking about environment, and some of the time we're put into this position where parents are asking us, is it the social media? Is it the device that's the problem? And, of course, the simple answer is not yes. It's like, well, that could certainly be contributing. But, imagine being a, 14-year-old girl, and you put a post on Instagram or your social media and you only get 3 likes, but you have many more friends than that. And then you start to question yourself, right? I mean, think about how you felt when you were 14 years old and somebody commented on something that you were wearing or something that you did and how you felt. So, I think the challenge of social media is helping these kids, these teenagers, they're developing brains and self-esteems. How do you process how you interact with this media, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where we as parents may sometimes be failing. I'm thinking of a recent conversation I had with our youngest. She's 10 and she does have this YouTube page. And I asked her, I said, hey, so why do you want more followers on YouTube? And I just had my fingers crossed, because I was like, oh man, she could say something here. And thankfully, what this kid said to me is, she said, Daddy, I really like creating content. I just enjoy creating content. And I enjoy that people are happy when I make content. So like, if I can make more people happy, I also feel good that like I've made people happy. And I was like, okay, so there is kind of a back and forth. And I guess, in certain apps such as YouTube, where I guess you can't really do dislikes and it's mostly likes, and followers and stuff. I think that there's something nice about that idea that my daughter has, that like she's putting out content into the world that brings joy to others. And that by bringing joy to others, she also has joy. I think that's how we live our non-digital lives in many ways, right? I mean, that's how I feel at my work. Like, I bring joy to people and they bring joy to me. That's a great thing. How do I teach her to not get too wrapped up in that, right? And to really focus on that process of enjoying like the creation and not worrying if she doesn't reach, 200 followers or 300 followers, right? I think that's our job as parents, is to help her, temper those expectations and really interface with the social media in a way that's beneficial to her.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as I'm hearing you say that, because the history of the Facebook like button was something I researched when I was writing my book, and it was created by Justin Rosenstein, who intended that it was supposed to be the like button, the little thumbs up, was supposed to be an awesome button that sent out bits of positivity into the world. Now, we all know that went a little bit awry with marketing and with trying to gain followership, and then you commoditize it and became big business, right? But I do think that the intention could be there. I think where we run into trouble is when a child's entire social world is wrapped up in social media.
Absolutely.
Then you don't have a lot to balance. It seems like everybody thinks negative if you get a thumbs down, and everybody thinks positive if you get a thumbs up. But if you have that online offline dichotomy, then you have some context that, oh, well, those are just the online people. I don't even know who they are. They're not even my close friends. So this doesn't matter. Whereas when somebody I really know has something to share, then it's worth listening to. It's kind of a circle of trust or vulnerability that we learn as humans, who to trust and who not to trust. And in all perfect worlds on social media, I think that it would be great if we could develop that awareness. Not that we're trying to put everyone in a bubble that they'll never hear anything negative, but rather that when they do hear something negative, they know how to process it, and that it wouldn't deplete their self-esteem as much because they have another world outside.
Right. And it's great that you mentioned that, Amy, because I think that you're, sort of bringing up that the social media apps that we're talking about all function a little bit differently, right? Like, they're not all the same, right? YouTube is not TikTok, is not Instagram, is not Snapchat, right? They're all a little bit different, right? So our daughter creating content for YouTube is a little bit different, than the teenagers who are all, like sitting at the mall and all have their phones out and are taking selfies of themselves to post, hey, look, I'm at the mall having this food with my friends. I know how we have felt as parents in some of those moments, being like, yeah, but why don't you just eat your food, right? Like, why don't you just enjoy the moment and just be present for what you're doing? But like, they have found that, posting what they're doing, whether it adds status or it's a way of, sharing what they're doing with others, or who knows what they're looking for. I think we know that some of them are just looking for approval. And I think that that's something that they have to learn to get that validation, just obviously internally from themselves, also from us as parents, and from those who, like you said, like their close friends, those who they care about most. But trying to not feed into this culture of having to capture every moment, and while you're trying to capture that moment, you're actually missing the moment, right?
Yeah. And I think as adults, we fail on that all the time. I can't tell you how many birthday parties I spent watching the birthday song behind a phone because I wanted to capture the moment, right? I think that there are these moments that even as adults, we get caught up in this. But we were talking a little bit earlier about, our device is good or bad? Is social media good or bad? But where I also think we're going is you're seeing a lot of this like gray space where I actually welcome it, because I think it's like toddler language development, that when a toddler is young, you begin to learn simple words like cat and dog. And as you get older, you get more language. There's cheetahs and leopards and lions, right? And so we have more granularity about how to talk about things. And what I want to invite you who are tuning in today to do with us is to walk into that gray space and to practice some of the complexity of thinking a little bit deeper. Not is this good or bad, but what elements do we want to keep and not keep? What can I teach? How can I evolve with this so that we continue to grow? Because I think if we're trying to force things into a good or bad bucket, then we might be missing the most important meat of how to connect with our teens as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's also useful to, think, Amy, in terms of what are the potential, pitfalls, right? Because I don't want people to get the impression that I'm only talking about all the wonderful parts of social media and why it's so great and, all this stuff. Yeah, there are obvious, kind of landmines out there that I think all of us, can and should be aware of. I've had, many patients very recently, be open and honest with me about, having sent, unsightly pictures of themselves to somebody else, thinking it was somebody who was a love interest, only to find that it was actually somebody trying to manipulate them, and you would think that in this day and age that maybe our teenagers know this. Hey, don't send pictures of yourself that are, unseemly, unsightly, that, nobody should ever see. But they're teens. Their brains are still developing. They make bad choices. But I think that's why it's so important for us as parents to continue to remind them of these things and say, hey, never do this. Never put a picture like this out into the internet. You never know what's going to happen. I think, especially with our younger one, learning to sort of like monitor like messaging and make sure that whatever strangers are posting on her page or anything like that, like we sort of are reading some of the messages, and even constantly checking in with your kid. Hey, have you gotten any weird messages from anybody? Has anybody said anything like negative to you or awful to you? And just being able to ask that question, not to say like, oh my gosh, now we're going to cut off your access, but say, hey, how did you process that? And how can we help you, process that and understand those messages and understand that there are bad actors in the world. And, this is how you can ignore them or block them or report them, and continue to interface on your social media device, in a, positive way, but also accept that there are going to be some negative interactions, right? We can't just paint this rosy picture of all, rainbows and unicorns, and it's all going to be perfect and great. No, they're going to, face really like difficult times. I think like one of my favorite things to talk about is that group text message. And you parents who have teenagers on those group text strings, sometimes those pictures get sent to those text strings. Sometimes very inappropriate language gets used on those text strings. What's cyberbullying, right? Like, what sort of digital citizen are you trying to raise? Is your kid the one who's going to, stand up on that string and say, hey, I found that comment really offensive and inappropriate, even though it wasn't even directed at me, I think that would offend many people, or this person, like, is that the sort of person that you're raising? I mean, I hope so, right? But like, you won't know that unless you ask. You won't know that unless you're teaching that. Like, it's okay to stand up to your friends in a text string and say, nah, man, that wasn't cool. Like, I don't think that's okay, or taking it offline and maybe having them approach that friend separately and say, hey, something that you said on the text string really bothered me. I think that's not okay. I think we can raise good human beings. I think that's what we're all here to do, is raise good human beings. Some of that means talking to them about the specific content of their messages. Doesn't mean sneaking into their phones or reading their messages, but talking to them about this sort of content and saying, hey, be aware of what might come up.
Yeah. I had a colleague who once referred to this as thinking about, rather than think about my child is old enough to get a device or not get a device, think about it in terms of what you would have to do if your child was getting a driver's license. There's certain things you have to take classes. You have to prove that you can pass the test. You have to do a road test, and then eventually you get a provisional license and then a license. What if we thought about smartphone usage as parents in that same sort of like earning capacity? I think when I'm talking to young people, I hear frustration that their parents will say either yes or no. Yes, you can have Snapchat. No, you cannot have Snapchat. Or yes, you can have email. No, you can't. But there's no pathway to earning something where they can demonstrate their trust. And so what I hear is that they want to be responsible and they want the carrot at the end of the stick.
Right.
And they're willing to take those steps. And maybe there's things we can do as parents to, for the first year, 2 years, 3 years, we're monitoring text messages. We are controlling your ability to download apps. And then as they get a little bit older, some of those permissions become a little bit more lax because they prove themselves. And if they fail, then they have them taken away and have to earn them back again. But there's that pathway, I think, is pretty powerful for building the kind of responsible adults that we want to ultimately raise. Yeah. Okay, so more interesting things on this. Gaming. Gaming is another huge topic. Talk about first, when we talk about gaming, what do you mean by gaming?
So I think most parents immediately think of video games, right? But I want to extend that thought to include any games on the phone. I think there are a lot of teenagers who find themselves playing a lot of phone games. I know that I'm upset with some of my patients for the phone games that they've advised me to play that I found myself sucked into because they're so addictive and they're so good. I'm not going to mention any of those on this
World of
webinar.
Warcraft.
but there's just a lot of things that, a lot of different ways that teenagers and children play games. I'll list some of them and see if you know any of these, Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite. There's a whole world on, the console games with the first person shooters, the Call of Duties and Rainbow Six and Battlefield. There's just tons and tons of games out there.
Sims is huge.
Sims is huge. Sims is huge. I mean, Stardew Valley, there are games on the Switch now that are, highly interactive and so much fun. But, I think like video gaming is a real strong part of the culture. And that, it's not just a boy thing, right? Like boys and girls play video games. So the topic of video games is interesting because I think the number one complaint I get from parents, as you can imagine, is, Dr. Blankson, what do I do? My child is addicted to video games. And I kind of hate that word because it makes your child sound like a fiend. And I appreciate that they may act like one. They may act like one, but I prefer using language like, problematic, right? Like problematic game usage. Yes. Somebody on the text string put NBA 2K, and yes, my friend, the 2Ks and Maddens and FIFAs, yes, I love those games, and those games are so much fun as well. But yeah, I mean, there is just so much out there, and I think one of the challenges that parents have with video games is, how do I set good boundaries for my kids? Because I think in some ways we all see these really wonderful things happen, right? You see your kid get onto a Minecraft server with three other friends, and they're just having a blast, and they're laughing and they're playing and they're interacting, and you're so happy. But let me see if you've heard this as well. Oh my gosh, man. Oh, watch out. Oh, where were you? Oh, you killed me. Oh no. I mean, there's a real, intensity to some. I'm definitely like censoring myself, but I know that sometimes it gets real intense in some of those video games that your kids play. And you may be wondering as you hear them screaming from upstairs or from the TV room, like, oh my gosh, like that mouth, right? Like, what are they saying? Sometimes I catch myself playing Fortnite with the kids and I'm like, okay, Bobo, chill. Like it's a game, but like, games bring out some really great emotions in us, right? They bring out some really great emotions, but once again, I go back to this idea of like, how do you game well? How do you teach your teenager to game well? So one of the things that I like to tell parents, and I know some of you out there already do this, and this may sound so simple and so obvious, but please, please know what your kids play. Like just know what they play and actually, sit down and maybe watch them once, or if you can, and if you're so inclined, and if you've got, not two left thumbs, try to play with them. And even if you have two left thumbs, try to play anyway, right? Like your kid will appreciate it. They may laugh at you. They may, be like, what are you doing, Dad? What are you doing, Mom? But like, I think you showing interest in what they show interest in really makes a huge difference in their lives, right? And then it opens up conversation about things like, hey, like last time you're playing with Johnny, I heard some language that was really kind of concerning, oh, yeah, I probably should calm down a little bit. Mom, it just gives you more of that in to really be, a partner in gaming with your kid without actually gaming with them, right? And certain games are going to lend themselves, more to that conversation than others. I find that in games like shooters, like while you're learning things about strategy and interaction, it's really just about the game itself. Whereas games like Minecraft and Roblox, where you're just interacting in a world, at least when I'm listening to my own kids, you hear a lot more kind of normal life interactions, which is great, right? Remember, if some of this is to help our kids with their social-emotional learning, like, hey, I purchased, actually, this is one of like your favorite stories is, yes, I did play World of Warcraft in my younger days. And one thing that Amy always gives me a hard time about is I used to play with her brother, my brother now. And, one of the days I remember, having my headphones on, I was playing with Sean and I yelled out, he made me leather pants. And Amy just was like, what are you guys doing? But like, I mean, it showed such generosity from Sean to make me leather pants. I mean, I had to be excited about it. But, there's a lot that our kids, I think, do get out of video games. But yeah, like just going back to like being that good digital citizen, on those games, like I think definitely helping them sort of learn how to interact with others and talk about it. I think there are other things that they can learn, but like still, those upper limits of how long to play. I think, after even an hour, I think that most kids need a break. So trying to encourage your kid to get up and take those breaks is really important. And certain games like, Fortnite, where, you lose a match and you have to get up while you load the next one, is a good time to remind your kid, hey, get up, walk around, have a drink of water. I've taken it a step further for some of my kids who game at the expense of other things. And maybe that's something that we're going to talk about later, but I'll go ahead and bring it up now. I think some of the importance about talking about these issues as a whole, whether it's time on devices like phones, time on a gaming system, is that all that time is being spent in a 24-hour day. And as part of my healthy habits, I talk about sleep, right? About our kids getting, 9 hours of sleep a night. I talk about them, eating fruits and vegetables. I talk about them getting at least an hour of exercise and active play. What do you think suffers the most when I see these kids who are on their devices too long or playing games too much?
Sleep.
It's their sleep and it's their exercise. So I'm always cognizant of that, of those kids who come in and they're tired, or they're saying, hey, I really need to go up on my ADD meds. And I'm like, bro, you're sleeping 6 hours a night and you're playing 5 hours of video games. I mean, maybe you should work on something else first, right? Like, they need balance, and they need us to help them with that balance more than anything else, right?
Yeah. I once heard to think about like a glass vase. And if you had 24 hours in the day, you put the big stuff that you most want to do first into the jar. So I want sleep. I want 8 hours of sleep. So I put on 8 big rocks, and I want to have, time to eat, and I want to have time to do social, and I need time for school. So you're filling in all these little rocks, and then all the other things that you want to do is like the sand for the day. So you fill it in, and you can fill it all the way up to the top of the jar, and you can usually fit it all in. But if you try to fill the jar with sand first, and then put in the rocks, there's no way everything will fit in the jar. I encourage you to try this. It's fun. But the idea being that if we just default to whatever we want to do and then hope that some of those big rocks will make it in, we'll be sorely mistaken. And I think even a visual for some of our kids to see how that works, to talk about what are the rocks, what is the sand, what are the pebbles, and how do you make your day in a very physical way, it could actually be a very useful exercise.
Yeah.
I also think that there's a dynamic happening here where we're trying to help teach great gaming. We're participating, we're modeling, we're sharing, but it's that modeling piece that you work with teens, I work with adults, that I see is an interesting sticking point, because you would not believe the number of chief HR officers, chief well-being, chief nurses, whole groups of wellness professionals who get caught up in games. And what's interesting to me about that is that there are certain types of games we're drawn to for different reasons. So my weakness is I like brain training games, because I'm like, I want to get sharper over time. I am a nerd. I'm Excel nerd. I am a nerd, but I love those brain training games, right? And it's my weakness because I think, it's doing something good for me. This is a good use of my time. And that means it's also my number one easiest thing to get sucked into, right? So if your child is really thinking about social, or if you as an adult are trying to think about social interaction, you are most likely to be tempted by social things. So figuring out maybe not how to give up things altogether, but rather to find ways to set some guardrails for yourself. Like, you know what, I'm going to invest this much time in social. I'm going to invest 5 minutes in brain training and not an hour. That gives you some sense of control over your time. And so that tech is not controlling you, you're controlling the tech, which is the way it should be, right? But I think in that modeling conversation, this is where the rub is, because the kids hear you say, hey, get off that device. And the kids are like, well, what are you doing? Right? You lose your cachet if they see you not doing what you say you're doing. So we as adults have to figure it out for ourselves so that we can model it as well.
Absolutely. And look, I think some of you are probably like wondering, how do kids, squeeze in, 2 hours of entertainment screen time during a busy school day? And let me tell you, they are creative. Right? I mean, they are really creative, whether or not it's during the actual school day, or on the way to school in the car, or, on the way home, or after they do their homework, or sometimes, to our chagrin, while they're doing their homework, right? They find ways to get on their devices. And I think they kind of need the constant reminders that it's okay to just set it down. and put it away. And, I don't want to tell anybody, that there are hard and fast rules of how to do this. Like, oh, you should definitely turn off your phone during homework or this and that. But I think if you know your kid, try to set reasonable, guidelines and boundaries to help them be their most successful. I think there are parents who are like, hey, we don't do any gaming during the week. And, that's just our rule. And, I don't know what to say about that. I think sometimes that's hard because what I often see in kids whose parents do that, to be honest with you, is I see something that I think is also not as healthy, which is binging, right? You'll see that these weekend binges happen where Friday night hits, Saturday night hits, and the kid will play 6 to 7 hours all at once. Their sleep cycle gets disrupted, and then getting back to a normal schedule for Monday for the next week is almost impossible. And I'm like, was that better? Or maybe you should have just let them have a little bit, maybe, and then maybe a little bit more on the weekend, but not just this, hey, he just does 7 hours on the weekend. So that way he's only averaging, an hour and a half a day. And I'm like, I don't think binging of any sort is really helpful for any of us for anything. So maybe just learning how to integrate this into our lives in a way where, going back to the first part of our conversation, for some of our kids, and your kid, that gaming that they do is their social connection. That's their texting. Honestly, like for some of them, that is the way that they're talking to their friends after school. It's not via Snapchat and it's not via Instagram for some of these boys. It is, we're going to play on our Minecraft server together. Taking that away from them really, I think, stunts their ability to have that social growth. So I think creating healthy and safe spaces for them to do that, and like I said, it's going to be different for every kid, is still going to be important during the week.
I remember once you talked about a child who was getting bullied on social, and the parents were saying that they wanted the child off of social because that was causing a decrease in self-esteem, and the child wanted to stay on it because it was his only chance at creating social relationships. Talk a little bit about how you navigate those kind of recommendations.
Yeah. Like, once again, I think it really has to be done on a case-by-case basis. But, for every kid who gets bullied, I think there are other kids who shut down bullies. And I'm so proud to hear of other patients of mine who say, hey, I really, like shut down this person who was being mean to someone else. And, I think that kids, once again, have an opportunity to practice being good citizens, good digital citizens by standing up for others. So once again, I think it has to start in their friend groups, and most of them are going to start by playing in their friend groups. Some of them are going to play with what we call randos. They're going to play with just random strangers out there, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky. Sometimes they're playing with adults, sometimes they're playing with kids who are disturbed for whatever reason, and that's tough. But I think telling them not to be on it at all is really not going to help them kind of practice that. Hey, how can I exercise my skills in being, a good human being and trying to, learn from this and help somebody else, and even just learn how to ignore a bully,
Yeah. I also am reminded of something you told me that really left an impression, which was, wouldn't it be so much better to have these conversations and this training ground while kids are at home, rather than say, no devices, no games, no phones until you go off to college, right? And then you have no coaching time left. Your opportunity window has closed. So think about this. You have X number of years with your kids at home. You have X number of years to teach them the right thing, to show them how to be compassionate, to show them what it means to have boundaries, to role model. So let's use this time and then send them off into the world, hopefully as better citizens with more awareness and more intentionality. So we have one big topic, and then I want to get to some questions. So any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. But the last big topic that I know is on parents' mind this fall is AI. There's a lot of fear around it. There's a lot of concern. Oh, what is AI going to do? What is it going to be like? It's out in the wild this fall. What are your thoughts on AI and school?
Yeah, I think I'll keep my comments pretty brief on this. I'm kind of the mindset to just accept it for what it is. I believe it can be a tool just like anything else. I think there are going to be a lot of parents who are concerned that their children are, using it to, like write papers and do other things. To all of those parents, I will say this. You have probably helped your child on a paper. You have probably spell checked and edited a paper for your child. I think we use whatever tools are available to us. If you've got Grammarly or something that, checks your grammar, you're already doing this to a certain extent. And I think, if Chat GPT or whatever AI is out there is writing something from your kid, yes, that is depriving your child of the opportunity to maybe write something on their own, unless they learn to use it as a tool and they say, hey, I like this intro paragraph that this AI has prepared. Let me now rewrite this paragraph so it's my own, but I like that structure. And by seeing it write it this way, it's actually helping me learn, how to formulate my thoughts a little bit more clearly. I just think it can be a tool. I don't think we need to get too excited about it in this negative way. I know lots of business professionals out there are using it for their work. I hear that some realtors use it to write blurbs for houses. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that ChatGPT is working its way into just regular life, and it is going to be in the schools. But I just say, take a deep breath. Don't fear it. Just accept it, but maybe talk to your teenager if they're planning on using it. Talk to them about how they're using it so that it feels like it's a learning tool and not a cheat device, a cheat code.
And going back to what you said earlier, if you haven't tried it yourself yet, try it out, because I think you'll gain a lot of insight into what it can and can't do, what its purpose is, and might give you some talking points to coach your child up on how to use it appropriately, or maybe to use it really well to become a better student. So there's some options. I know there's a lot of unknowns still, and I hear your concerns, but I also think that getting tied up in fear only paralyzes us. It doesn't really help us to move forward to be where we want to be. So stay curious, go ahead and try it out, and go from there. So we have about 9 minutes left. I don't see any questions quite yet in the chat. So if there are, there's one that popped up here. Nope, that wasn't a question. So if there are some questions, go ahead and type them in now. If not, then we can keep chatting as well, because this is a perennial topic in our house. One of the topics that I do feel is pertinent and relevant with this topic is shame cycles. It's been a word that has been on my mind all year, talking about digital wellness. As a speaker and an expert in this field, sometimes I feel like either I am the phone police or I'm construed as the phone police. I don't really want to be the phone police. And especially in my own household. And I don't think that shame is necessarily a particularly good motivating factor for saying, oh, I can't believe you're doing this, or, oh, wow, you've been on screen time. How much? Oh, that's crazy. Rather, I think it's more helpful to inform and empower. And the same thing happens with parenting. How can we really use what we know to inform and empower, as opposed to shame and blame? So another question just came in. How can we leverage social media with teens for behavior change or health education? Ooh, I like that question.
Leverage social media with teens for behavior change. Yeah. I think one way that we could do this is maybe having your teen, and once again, it depends on what social media you're talking about, but whether it's something like YouTube for like the younger kids and maybe Instagram for the older kids, I would say that you as the parent might go through the list of people they follow and help curate a list of people who you think bring positivity into the world and into the planet. I'm not going to name any names of the negative people who I think our teens can follow, but you know who they are. And I think that, sometimes our kids, especially our teenagers, especially our, 13, 14-year-olds, very like vulnerable. They start looking at people and comparing themselves. I mean, as you can imagine, like those of you with, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, especially boys, the boys are always coming into the office being like, oh, Dr. Blankson, how tall am I going to be? Oh, I want to be bigger. I want to be stronger. I want to have more muscles. I want to have more this. I'm sure they're getting a lot of this, right, from social media. And I'm always that one to sort of like bring them back to earth and say, hey, like look at your mom, look at your dad, and, approximate how you're going to turn out, right? Like there's a lot of genetics behind how your body's going to look as you get older. And that's okay. Comparing yourself to Michael B. Jordan may not be the best thing for your mental health, but maybe you should, not compare yourself to that person. And maybe you should follow other people on the internet who bring more joy and positivity to your life. I think that's one way that we as parents can help our teens not get into that rut of the, oh, I want to be like that person. I want to look like that person. I want to do this thing. And, maybe follow people who aren't all about the appearances and the looks.
Yeah, I would also add to that too, in addition to the comparison and who we follow, is looking at apps that can actually help fuel you to be better.
Yeah.
I call it fighting fire with fire. And I actually reviewed about 500 different apps, gadgets, and devices when I was writing my book on the future of happiness. And in the process, I tried so many apps that would say that they would help you develop a positive habit. And maybe it was just ad driven and it wasn't that great. But there are several that are really fantastic, like Habit Tracker or Freedom, which helps you to put your phone down. Or I really love the Muse meditation app. You could also try, there's all kinds of meditation apps like Calm that I was thinking of as well. But these apps are good in small doses. So my recommendation here is to pick one and stick with it, and pick one habit, not like 20 habits to do all at once that you're going to work at slowly over time. Because the research is showing that if you can take micro steps towards change, that is the most effective way to create lifestyle behavior change. So know why you're doing the app, make sure it's a good app, ideally ad-free, and then begin to use it in small little chunks. And this is truly something that we at the Digital Wellness Institute are trying to do for adults as well. We work with organizations on creating these micro challenges, small, tiny habits that help teams to build awareness in a fun way. And I think apps can do the same thing for our teens in the right doses and the right amounts to reinforce positive behaviors.
Absolutely. I mean, very quick, funny story. I have a patient who's very resistant to change, who is really struggling with healthy habits. And the last time I saw him, he lit up when he told me that he'd improved his sleep. And I was like, wow, how did you do that? Wow, like you're getting 8 hours of sleep now. And he said, Dr. Blankson, it's Pokemon. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? He's like, it's Pokemon sleep. Guys, no joke. There's a Pokemon sleep app that only works when you're asleep and you catch Pokemon while you sleep. I mean, he and I laughed for several minutes about it. I don't necessarily recommend using that to improve your child's sleep, but it was funny that for this particular patient who is very resistant to change, he found something that worked for him. And he's like, I'm actually excited to get to bed and sleep the right number of hours, because then I might wake up and have a Pokemon. Kind of funny, but it works.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. We have time for one more question here in the chat. And it is, do you have any specific recommendations for detoxing after all this summertime? What would you recommend for going back to school?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'll do a very quick run through my 5 healthy habits, right? So 9-5-2-1-0, 9 hours of sleep, 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, 2 hours or less of that entertainment screen time, 1 hour or more of exercise, and zero sugar, zero sugary drinks, focusing mostly on water. Trying to find a balance of those, especially as we kind of ease back into the year, I think is what we're all sort of wondering how to do. And I think maybe this idea of doing it as a family is great, right? Like I know last night, even though our kids officially start school tomorrow, we kind of did a dry run, We did not do our family show at, 8:30, 9 o'clock. We were like, nope, screens off, an hour and a half before bed, and everybody had downtime. We went up, we did a little music together, we Rubik's Cubed, we did, non-digital things, and we sort of wound ourselves down at night. We did some early morning exercise, me and the daughter today, by my oldest one, and that was a great way for us just to get our exercise in. I mean, I think as much as we as parents can really try to model this behavior for our kids and ease them into it, showing them, hey, I've had a summer too, I stayed up way too late. I watched more movies with them. I played more video games with them, but hey, now we're getting back into this flow where we really want to be more disciplined. I think we are the ones who have to be the change, for our kids. We're the ones who kind of set the bar for them and say, hey, if dad and mom can do this, we know that you can do this. Sometimes you can do it even better than us. And I think that goes back to this concept, which we really haven't had a chance to talk about, but mutual submission. I think it's something that I use in my appointments a lot with patients, like this idea that, oh, I'm the doctor and you're the patient. I'd much rather be Dr. Bobo, Dr. B, Bobo, whatever you want to call me, if it makes you feel like you're more on my level so that we can interact and really be real with each other. I am grateful for some accountability, from my kids, like, hey, daddy, like you haven't been exercising as much. And I'm like, oh yeah, Yeah, I guess you're right. I don't mind that. And I think if we as parents can have a little bit of humility when it's like, hey, dad, I'm talking to you, or when I was trying to talk to you, it seemed like you were on your phone. Oh my gosh, like, I'm so sorry, right? Like, I think having that sort of openness with our kids and being able to be called out on that stuff, I think that makes us better parents, and that helps them be better kids, I think.
You have a call out for someone wanting you to repeat the 95210.
Oh,
What are those
yes.
again?
9 hours of sleep a night, 5 servings of fruits and or vegetables, right? Like a serving being like the size of your fist, and some combination of at least 5 of those a day. 2 hours or less of that entertainment screen time. 1 hour or more of exercise or active play, right? So that can be, walking the dog, biking, swimming, your teen sport, whatever. And then zero sugar, whether that's, excessive sugar in their diet or sugary drinks, but really focusing on water as their main source of hydration.
Yep, it's a great framework. So we are just about out of time, and I want to thank you for making the time in your busy day to invest in your kids and thinking about how to create a healthier generation for digital wellness. If you've enjoyed this, we have webinars every month and sometimes more than once a month. Our next one is coming up September 13th on the cost of digitalization on happiness and workplace well-being with Dr. Amnia Omar from the United Arab Emirates. It should be a fascinating conversation. So I hope you'll continue tuning in with us. I hope you got value out of this. We will record it and post it on YouTube for the Digital Wellness Institute so you can share around. But thank you so much for making the time, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Have a good rest of your day.